And we are live. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Unpack Art and Architecture podcast. I am Joseph, your host, and today we are looking into the introduction to planetary boundaries. Let's get into it. So, I'm going to start this one with a brief recap of the previous episode, the episode that was fairly long. Hopefully, this one is not as long and that we are not really disturbed by static. So previously we looked into the earth as a canvas, with an analogy of architecture being the work of art that is created by the professionals of the built environment. So appreciating the nature of earth as a canvas helps us understand at least the basis of why certain works of art, architecture in this case, are created the way they are, because the earth creates the basis on which or of which some of these works of art and architecture are done. So I started the episode off with a reading from the book of Genesis. Yes, believe it or not, started off with a reading from the book of Genesis, where we had a review of the concept of day and night, the sky covering the wasteland as they started off, which gives us the beginning of the atmosphere, and then the dry land, the land masses, the vegetation. All these are going to be critical in this episode. The biodiversity, when all the animals were created, humans and how they have the dominion over the earth. So it was generally the beginning. Now, irrespective of whatever your school of thought is as far as how the earth got formed, at the end of the day, we all arrive to the fact that it is an artifact that was handed to humanity, whether by evolution or by God. I have to be respectful of everyone's belief system here. But what I want us to keep in mind is that humans inherited the earth with all this beauty, with all this biodiversity. So, borrowing from a number of disciplines, we looked into the location and how it is affected um, by the different factors created by the earth. So, we had geometrical references. I think it doesn't hurt to quickly jump into it, at least as far as this podcast is concerned. Things move fairly faster when we switch to the sketching interface. So allow me to quickly switch there. Okay, I think this is it. So the recap, we had geometric references, right, where we looked into the spherical nature of Earth. Okay, I think this is going to be better. Just have to be careful of the orientation here. So we looked into the spherical nature of Earth and how this nature has an impact on how light is received on Earth. So if we have, say, solar rays coming from the sun, they end up casting a huge shadow on one half of the Earth, okay? Creating the concept of night and day, okay? That's what happened. And then we also had astrological references where we got to appreciate what a star is and how the sun is a key star. And in this particular on this particular podcast, we're looking at the sun as the star that is filled with all these burning gases, and as a result of the different chemical reactions, we end up having all this heat and light striking planet Earth. Okay, so a couple of chemical or chemistry related references there: heat, light, or as one would sum it up as radiation striking Earth. So all these are important when one is going to talk about planetary boundaries. This was a fairly good introduction to what um, to what to what we're going to jump into today. So again, the Earth has a tilt. It's another concept we looked at. So it's tilted off the vertical axis by a couple of degrees, 23 degrees. I don't want to get into the decimal points. And its revolution around the Earth, the sun. So if this is the sun which is quite huge, okay? So the Earth, first of all, it rotates about its axis, okay? And on top of that, it also revolves around the sun, okay? And it takes it roughly 365 days. This takes roughly 24 hours. So the concept of night and day is created. That's how we have the 24. But through these 365 days, we get to experience seasons. Okay? And that's really, in a nutshell, what we dealt with. So the seasons, the key seasons are, well, spring, summer, interesting letter M's there, autumn, or fall, when the leaves fall off trees, then winter. Okay? All these come about based on the proximity of the Earth to the sun. Okay, this axial tilt exposes a particular portion of the sun, of the Earth to the sun, and depending on where it is along this orbit, okay, the Earth gets to experience a different kind of exposure to the sun. That is how the four main seasons come about. And precisely that is a brief recap of what happened in the previous episode. So in this episode, we are going to jump into the introduction to the planetary boundaries. But before we get deeper into that, we need to appreciate a couple of key concepts. This is going to sound a lot like a primary school episode, but bear with me. These are very important. These are very important concepts, in that if one does not understand them, they may not necessarily make sense of what is yet to come, at least as far as the boundaries are concerned. So the very first concept is weather. Again, make reference to the previous episode. So weather. Hope the focus is okay, because yeah, there you go. Yeah, so weather. So now, weather is really the condition of the atmosphere. It's as simple as that. Think of it as a state of, in this case, a state of the atmosphere. Remember that blanket of gases that was created after the land masses? Yeah, that one. The state of the atmosphere. Okay? That's the weather. State of the atmosphere, but we have to be specific at a particular location, or location and time, or we could say place. Place is a better word. We'll jump into all these different terms: place, space. They have a slight difference if you look into them. Yeah, at a particular place and time. Okay. So that's in that case, we will be looking into things like, you know, the wind patterns, the temperature, the rain or precipitation, as people from geography would call it, and the sun. Okay, that's weather. Then the other concept is climate. Okay, climate. It's the average weather condition of a place over a period of time. So we have time coming into the picture. Okay, so it's the average weather condition of a place. Okay, so it could be mild. That is when they average particular results out, they get a given figure, and it's either mild or it's intense, it's warm or it's wet, whatever it may be. That's climate. Then we have systems. It is important to appreciate what systems are, at least to have a basic understanding of what we're here to dive into. So systems. Think of systems as a group. Okay, so it's it's not just one element, but a group of elements. I like using the word entities. I don't know why I'm hesitant to use it here. A group of elements. Okay, entities that are connected. Keyword is connected. Okay, that are connected, or they work together, or they just work together. If I'm to use an analogy of a gear, they work together. This is an interesting gear, my goodness. Okay, so in that, if you take one out of that system, you essentially disrupt the system. Okay, you get. I hope you do get the picture. And then, of course, the atmosphere. Just wanted to jump back into that one. Atmosphere. Crazy handwriting here, but we have to work with the conditions of time. So atmosphere. So think of the atmosphere as a combination of all these gases, right? And again, I'm really working on the assumption that, let's say, analogies are not that easy, but let's assume, let's say one has just woken up from a coma and they had no idea what some of these terms are. So please don't feel insulted that you're getting explanations that are primary school level. I mean, there are people who may not have encountered some of these terms, at least to this level of, to this kind of explanation. So, atmosphere, okay, it's a mixture of gases, okay, that surround the Earth. Could even say planet, because every planet does have an atmosphere around it, or at least planet Earth does have an atmosphere. And somewhere after that, let's say if you're looking at Earth, okay, hope I'm still within the frame. If you're looking at Earth, the atmosphere is like a thin blanket that covers the Earth. Let's say if I've cut it into two, you'll notice that there's a thin layer of these gases. But now, right above that thin layer is another layer of gases, which is called ozone. I'm not going to dive into the chemistry because I would be lying. I'm not a chemist. But I can research and dive in for those who really want that kind of thing. It's not so bad a territory to tread. So the ozone is a layer that essentially protects the Earth from direct solar radiation. If I'm to bring back the other board for those that are watching, these radiations that come straight from the sun do not strike Earth directly. There is a thin layer of ozone, at least as far as how we were handed Earth over to the state in which it was. There is a thin layer of ozone that protects the Earth. around there. Okay, so that's the one I'm referring to here in terms of the atmosphere. So over the years, with all these conditions in the entire galaxy, the Earth has had these favorable conditions that favor human life. And borrowing heavily from a geographical term, the geographers, the where did I write it? It is an epoch. Okay, it's a geological epoch called the Holocene, where civilizations were developing. Okay, so civilizations developed over time, and the tribes. So we had tribes that were nomadic, and as they moved and engaged with a variety, and engaged with a variety of circumstances, they kept on innovating, especially as far as food production was concerned. They learned how to plant, they learned how to keep animals together in one location without necessarily moving around. They developed various technologies to facilitate that kind of farming. As such, we had stable or permanent settlements. And later on, there will be an episode on vernacular settlements because they have a way they help one understand the climate. So it is an architecture that I hope to unpack at some point in the future. So you have to stay tuned to that. Carrying on. So these settlements evolved into cities over time. It is an evolution that again I'll also have to cover as we carry along, because that evolution has had various movements of architecture in place. So when unpacking architecture of a given building, after identifying its location as we've learned so far, at least as far as context is concerned, when we start to look into the other aspects of context, we'll need to know which time frame this building exists. So that historical timeline will come in very, very handy. So this evolution process occurred over time, and smaller settlements evolved into cities. So now think of the influence architecture had in that evolution. That's where these critical studies come into play. If you look at how we've evolved over the years, how the architecture has changed in terms of material selection, how the way we build has also changed. We have had an impact on the environment. As such, the scientists that are in charge of, or that have the task to deal with Earth systems, have essentially, over the years, have been carrying out some kind of research. It's not some kind, it is research. They did carry out research. So they ran tests, they took measurements over time and recorded a variety of, different parameters. So if before we go deeper into that, we could look into what an Earth system is. So looking at, remember we described systems. So let's see, systems. Looking into this, a system is a group of elements or entities that work together. So if you look at the Earth as a collection of systems, the Earth has a number of systems that work together, and we're going to get into those. So we have Earth system scientists that looked at the systems of the Earth and picked up all these different patterns, as we're going to briefly get introduced to them, and they realized that we are headed somewhere not very positive. Something had to be done to deal with the potential. I don't want to sound too dramatic over this, but yes, some trends were not helping humanity, as we'll see. So the interactions of the different systems, the biological systems, the physical and the chemical processes, it shows how the natural cycles are getting interrupted. So these scientists decided to generate a number of boundaries that should not really be exceeded. by the developments that we make. Okay, so that's how the 9 planetary boundaries came about. Let's look into them briefly. Okay, so these planetary boundaries include the first, the biosphere integrity, and these are going to be explained. Biosphere integrity. The second is climate change. Interesting topic, that one. Then there's the third, ocean acidification. The fourth, freshwater use. And the fifth, atmosphere aerosol loading. They sound heavy words for some people, but as I've said, they will be explained. Atmosphere aerosol loading. Then the sixth, novel entities. Some of these are necessary steps. We have to go through these fairly painful steps of looking into what is potentially boring for some people. Some people might expect to see architecture related elements, whatever that would mean, because there's a tendency to think that these are not in any way linked to architecture, yet the linkages are very, very, very big, because the cities, as I've described, the cities on the cities form 3% of the Earth's surface, and as such, the data that scientists have generated shows that cities contribute roughly 70% of the carbon emissions. And these carbon emissions have a way they disrupt these different processes, as we will unpack them in a later episode. So cities are made of the built environment, essentially, and that is architecture. So if we do not understand the consequences of actions as far as the creation of the built environment is concerned, we're likely to exceed some of these planetary boundaries and, trigger an existential crisis. Okay, carrying on. So these are necessary steps in a nutshell. Bio, geochemical flows. We have chemists in the house. It would be nice for them to chip in. 8, land system change. Fairly controversial, but yeah. Change is always tricky for some situations. And the 9th is the stratosphere. Interesting word. From the stratosphere. Stratospheric. Okay, it has to do with the stratosphere. The depletion of the ozone layer as described. So, biosphere integrity. I'm going to just explain the few that, again, this is simply an introduction. We'll dive deeper and keep qualifying each back to architecture, because these, again, form part of our future criteria. Okay? Because when unpacking architecture, you need a criteria. You need a criteria through which you're going to, you need a number of lenses through which you're going to look at a work of architecture. How is it performing through the lens of biosphere integrity? How is the work of art performing on the climate change scale as established by you, the person unpacking? What are the climate adaptation strategies of a given project? Things of that kind may sound complicated now, but as we carry along, they will cease to be complicated. So in a nutshell, these are the different planetary boundaries, in that beyond them, if we exceed them, they are like thresholds. The key word is thresholds. They are boundaries beyond which we are not supposed to exceed. If we do, we risk disrupting the different systems on Earth. As such, we risk making the Earth inhabitable. And one of the key goals of architecture is to create a habitat for human life. So all these factors contribute towards creating a habitat for not just human life, but the entire biodiversity. Because again, remember, we were handed, yes, we're given dominion over all these things on Earth. As such, we have to be responsible stewards on this planet Earth. So the future episodes are going to carry on breaking down some of these, because some of them are quite relevant to architecture, some not so much. Ocean acidification, for instance, perhaps through material selection. What kind of materials are selected to create what kind of architecture? Are we looking at marine architecture, perhaps? What materials are you selecting to design that floating work of architecture? You have to pay attention to ocean acidification. But it doesn't even have to be a work of architecture floating on water. It could be anywhere on land, but because again we have systems that work together, whereby you have, when you start using sign language again, it's almost safe to assume that you are going off the respectful path. Let me just briefly explain how these systems work together, and I conclude this episode. So we have Earth, right? Again, sun, critical diagram. I don't know how many times I've drawn it, but it's the source of everything, essentially. So you have the light rays coming from the sun to the Earth, okay? That process triggers so many reactions. You have an atmosphere here, you have the ozone layer. So these rays are going through all that, okay, striking land masses and water bodies, okay? So you have water, H2O for the chemists in the house. And then we also have vegetation. Not going to get the green. Sometimes when a drawing gets too colorful, interesting things happen in the head. But okay, moving on. So when water is heated, let's say this is water, okay? You have land. So this is land, this is water, and then you do have the atmosphere, a couple of gases in there, and the ozone. So we have light striking Earth, okay? It's going to warm the land, and it will make the water evaporate. When the water evaporates, clouds will form, okay? These different gases of the atmosphere get blown by wind, and different pressure pushes these gases around. So the wind blows the clouds over to the land, and then when the condensed water vapor eventually, over time, it cools off to form rain, and then the water flows on the land back into the oceans. So this is, for instance, this is a hydrological system, okay? We're looking into hydrology. It's one of the systems. There are many other systems. Now, this is an example of a system that can't get disrupted, or it aids the thriving of yet another system. But if, say, we disrupt it, for instance, we generate architecture that is, not favoring the flow of water, or essentially cutting off this process of water getting back to the oceans, that disrupts the system. We'll have floods somewhere along the way. We'll have, it will disrupt the regularity, the regularity of how often the rain comes. That is an example of a system. So we'll dive into those, and all these again, they are really rotating around the architecture that is created. So that these are some of the interesting things that architects really give thought to when designing a building. That is why an environmental designer or a professional of the built environment, architects, quantity surveyors, name it, all those people that help in the process of creating architecture, they have to pay attention to some of these processes and work within particular limits that are not really harmful to the environment. Or if they're creating harm somewhere, they have to compensate for that harm. So when unpacking a given piece of architecture, we might have to look deeper into some of these elements. Or let's say let's say we're designing something, how best can it be designed such that it is not harmful to the environment? And that concludes our introduction to the planetary boundaries. Hopefully, the coming episodes are going to give us a quick refresher for those that have taken ages without drawing, because one of the key intentions of this podcast is to help those that are on their journey through architecture school, those that are yet to hire an architect or an environmental designer, all those that are just interested in architecture, because this is something that is interesting. You might be a potential client that is going to engage an architect at some point. Being able to articulate your vision to that architect, if you're a potential client and you want to articulate that vision to the architect, I mean, if they're a good architect, they'll extract it out of you the best way they can, but it also aids them when you can communicate it well. So why am I saying that? Is the episodes that will be helping us understand how to draw. Not necessarily because of the art element in the podcast, no, but it is part of the architecture, because architects communicate through drawings, through physical models, through digital models, and anything that really helps you or one convey a given message. So even as a potential client to an architect, if you can articulate your vision in the simplest way possible, as I will explain in the hopefully tutorial Tuesdays. There's a lot going on. We're still restructuring a number of things, but hopefully there will be a tutorial Tuesday where we get into how to draw, how best to create emphasis in a given drawing. See, drawing is different from photography. Photography covers, let's say, everything in a given photograph, especially if the photographer is not experienced. It just captures everything. But sketching or drawing has a focus. How do you create such focus? So that is one of the key things that we will dive into. Hopefully, a tutorial Tuesday, not necessarily Tuesday the day after today. Could be any other Tuesday. Again, we're still restructuring. But hopefully, all will go as planned. As for today, that's it. Thanks for watching.